Welcome to the relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Yesterday, south of the border, in La Paz, Mexico, Kenya Enriquez won the WBC interim flyweight title opposite the ring, Ibeth Zamora Silva, former champion.
Won a lopsided decision.
Saw some interest for this fight in the build-up of it, but there was no U.S. broadcast partner for the match, so it flew somewhat under the radar here in America.
Certainly a barn burner on paper.
Between these two, Ibeth Zamora Silva, the former champion, nicknamed La Roca, the Rock, a mid-range to inside puncher, a volume puncher, and Kenya Enriquez, one of the hardest punchers anywhere at or around these weights.
It had fireworks written all over it. I didn't expect it to be as lopsided as it turned out to be. Kenya Enriquez being some years younger,
a little taller, and a little longer than Ibeth Zamora Silva. I want to say that Kenya Enriquez broke character because more often than not, she's the kind of fighter that steps into her jab, steps into her punches, and looks to crowd the pocket. With Ibeth Zamora Silva, she chose to box and punch, stick and move.
was smart.
Not staying in one spot, not selling out, trading punches mid-range to inside. That would have given Ibeth Zamora Silva what she wanted. Instead, Kenya chose to break character.
She boxed her up.
Keeping Ibeth Zamora Silva moving, not allowing her to set her feet, and walking her into punches, walking her into traps.
She boxed her up.
In what was a lopsided fight, a lopsided affair, Kenya Enriquez has effectively become the WBC's interim champion in the women's flyweight division and the mandatory challenger to unified champion Marlen Esparza, who's currently under orders to run it back with former champion Gabriela Alaniz of Argentina.
My thoughts.
This ain't the first time Kenya won an interim title. Years ago, she became WBC interim champion downstairs at light flyweight, but she never got her opportunity. She never got her crack at the apple at then WBC champion Yesenia Gomez.
If you can believe this, Kenya Enriquez was left waiting in the queue by the WBC for something like, 3 or 4 years.
She never got her title shot down there at light flyweight, and it's not uncommon to see the World Boxing Council do this. Look at how long it took for Dillian to get his crack at the apple, Dillian White, up there at heavyweight. And what about Carlos Adames at middle? How much longer does he have to wait before he gets his crack at the apple with Jermall Charlo?
It's not uncommon to see the World Boxing Council drag their feet.
They do so indiscriminately, reserving the right to order a fight whenever they feel like, even when there's a mandatory challenger in the queue. At flyweight,
Kenya's the mandatory.
Kenya Enriquez is the World Boxing Council's interim champion and mandatory challenger to the winner of Esparza versus Alaniz 2.
Whenever that fight happens.
That rematch, which was ordered by the WBO on the premise that the outcome of the match, the judges' scorecards, did not reflect the actual fight, the controversial decision.
Didn't reflect the fight.
So now Marlen Esparza has to run it back with her, and if she can secure the W one more time, if she can stay champion, she will have Kenya Enriquez to deal with. The question is, how long will it take the WBC to order the fight? Because they never ordered Enriquez versus Gomez.
Late order Enriquez versus Esparza.
It was speculated years ago. The real reason the World Boxing Council held off on ordering Enriquez versus Yesenia Gomez was because of the relationship they had with Yesenia's promoter, Pepe Gomez.
They're buddies, him and Mauricio, and it was speculated that as a favor to Pepe, they didn't order the fight between Kenya and Yesenia because they figured Kenya's going to knock her out.
The World Boxing Council essentially assisted in protecting Yesenia Gomez based on their relationship with Pepe Gomez, her promoter. That's what most speculated before. The silver lining here is that perhaps the World Boxing Council doesn't have the relationship with Golden Boy,
With
Oscar and Eric Gomez that they had with Pepe Gomez, that they might actually order this fight because they're not as tightly knit with Golden Boy as they were with Pepe, and we'll see what happens.
Are they going to drag their feet or are they going to order this fight?
Marlen Esparza has her work cut out for her. Her unconvincing victory over Gabriela Alaniz has left the WBO so inclined to order a second fight, order a rematch. Gabriela, a mid-range to inside fighter,
Pressure fighter.
a volume puncher, much like Kenya Enriquez is a volume puncher. In spite of the performance that she put on last night, boxing and punching, sticking and moving, more often than not, that's what Kenya is.
Pressure fighter.
She, like Gabriela Alaniz, is a prolific puncher, a volume puncher, a pressure fighter.
And that's likely how she would fight Marlen Esparza.
She'd put her under pressure. I will say in the case of Marlen, Gabriela Alaniz, as a fighter, is adequate preparation for a Kenya Enriquez fight.
Yeah.
It is, because those two fighters are similar.
Gabriela and Kenya.
You also have to factor in that Marlen's quote-unquote victory over Gabriela, it was rather unconvincing.
You could say that about her victory over Naoko Fujioka. You could say that about her victory over Beth Zamora Silva. You could say that about her victory over Sulem Urbina.
These victories are not decisive victories for Marlen Esparza. She's winning these fights by the skin of her teeth, if she's even winning them.
Kenya's victory yesterday puts her in line for a Marlen Esparza fight. Beth Zamora Silva is a common opponent between them. Both Kenya and Marlen fought Beth.
Now the question is, will Kenya and Marlen ever share the ring? Will the World Boxing Council at some point order the fight and get Kenya her title shot? Men's lightweight news. Frank Martin reacted to the backlash he's on the receiving end of for withdrawing from the Shakur Stevenson fight. The most he offered up in terms of an explanation was, "I ain't duck shit." To which Shakur Stevenson responded, "So what, you just ghosted the situation? Telling people how you was making quadruple more than your biggest payday."
Quadruple?
Well, the ballpark figures that are out there for Frank Martin's purses, fight by fight, indicate that he's barely, just barely, a six-figure fighter, let alone a seven-figure fighter. And per reports, that's what he stood to make in the Stevenson fight, approximately 7 figures, just a little over $1 million.
Where he's reported to have made just under $100,000 for the Michelle Rivera fight.
Was reported to be making in excess of $1 million for the Stevenson fight. And Shakur Stevenson's comments are consistent with those reports that if he would have fought him, he would have made a lot more money than he's been making.
Frank is not a seven-figure fighter.
Not telling you that Shakur Stevenson is a household name yet, but I can tell you that he draws better in New Jersey than Frank draws anywhere in the country.
Not telling you that Shakur Stevenson is a household name yet,
But the people at the PBC are not paying Frank Martin per fight what the people at Top Rank are paying Shakur Stevenson per fight. The investment is not equal.
it's not the same.
Most of the buzz surrounding Frank Martin as a fighter doesn't stem from anything he did or anyone he fought so much as who promotes him. That he is a man-down promotions fighter, and Errol Spence Jr. is his promoter.
That's who's going up to bat for him.
Those are the individuals that have been defending him throughout all of this. Errol Spence Jr. fans. For the simple fact that he is Errol Spence Jr.'s fighter. For the simple fact that he's on the PBC side of things.
It's the usual suspects.
Running interference, a Twitter user that goes by the name TDHBXG said, "Can we get something straight? Both Shakur Stevenson and Frank Martin were offered contracts. They both decided not to sign. So miss me with the, but this one is different. Bullshit. They both pulled the same move. Only difference is ESPN leaked the details of the Martin fight. That's it."
I think he's likening this situation to the situation between Devin and Shakur.
I've been seeing a lot of people do that, but those two situations aren't similar because talks for Haney versus Stevenson were nowhere near as far along as talks for Stevenson versus Martin.
You know, the 25% that Devin says he offered Shakur?
Talks for a fight between Devin and Shakur were nowhere near as far along as talks for a fight between Shakur and Frank.
They weren't.
And I've questioned the legitimacy of Devin's offer to Shakur Stevenson because, need I remind you, he wasn't the only guy that he was talking to. Immediately after the Lomachenko fight, it was Devin Haney himself who said he got in contact with Eddie to see about doing a pro-grade fight. And that's before any of that Stevenson stuff even started.
Devin said on his own social media that he's the one that initiated contact for that fight with Regis.
Whereas when it comes to Shakur and the supposed offer that he made him for 25% of the pot, it was Bob Arum himself who stated there's no substance to that offer.
The offer from Devin.
Doesn't sound like the money to do the fight was coming from Top Rank. Not if Top Rank impresario Bob Arum is saying there was no substance to the offer. So if Top Rank wasn't paying for the fight, who was? Because Devin ain't got no broadcast partner.
He's a free agent.
Saying you're offering a guy 25%, but 25% of what? Of whose pot? Who's paying for the fight?
It's a deflection.
Likening one situation to the other is little more than a deflection from the usual suspects.
It's a deflection.
Because talks for Haney versus Stevenson were nowhere near as far along as talks for Stevenson versus Martin. They were almost at the finish line with Stevenson versus Martin, so much so that the World Boxing Council actually called off the scheduled purse bid.
Was that 6 days ago?
They called it off because they got confirmation on both sides, from the TGB side and the Top Rank side, that they had agreed to terms, and that was about 5 or 6 days ago.
The fight between Shakur and Frank was almost done. They were almost at the finish line, and in the 13th hour, Frank decided to withdraw. Frank decided to pull out.
Why are they defending him?
Because he's a PBC fighter.
Because underneath it all, they didn't want Frank Martin to go over there and box Shakur Stevenson. They didn't want to see another PBC fighter get exposed. It's been a hard couple of weeks and a hard couple of months for the Haymanites.
Between what happened to Stephen Fulton and what happened to Errol Spence Jr., they didn't want to have to suffer through that again.
Frank Martin was going to lose that fight. I don't have a doubt in my mind that he was going to lose, and he was going to lose wide to Shakur Stevenson. He was going to get taken to school. And underneath it all, if nothing else, that's what they were afraid of.
That's why they're not angry at him for pulling out.
If anything, they're trying to justify it. They're trying to make excuses for it.
They are.
Speculating that the reason he withdrew is because he's got something bigger lined up.
What?
Tell you what, it better be bigger. For withdrawing from a career-high purse and a world title opportunity in a more high-profile fight than any fight that he's been in, whatever else he's got lined up, it better be big. It better be bigger.
Better be.
Because it looks like a duck, and he's not the only PBC fighter to swerve a direct order from the World Boxing Council. Before the WBC ordered Frank to fight Shakur, they ordered Isaac to fight Shakur, and he skipped out on that order so he could fight Giovanni Cabrera on an undercard.
Oh?
Exactly. You could have been headlining opposite the ring Shakur Stevenson in a world title fight. You skipped out on that to box a nobody.
On an undercard.
So I'm supposed to give Frank Martin the benefit of the doubt? Why?
Because he would never.
He just did. In the 13th hour, when they're close to the finish line, he just pulled out of the fight.
They were almost there.
They were almost done. And I don't know, maybe what they figured at the last minute is, for having Frank go over there and lose to that guy, maybe we have him on our own side of things and lose to somebody else. Maybe we put him in a Gervonta Davis fight. But I'll tell you, it better be a Gervonta Davis fight. It better be a fight with a bigger profile for more money, because if it isn't,
It's a duck.
it's a stone cold duck. Unless it's a fight, a bigger fight with a bigger profile for more money, all it is an according to Hoyle duck. I don't pledge fealty to Al Heyman or his PBC or Showtime. I don't owe this guy the benefit of the doubt. All I know is up until a few days ago, you were en route to fight Shakur Stevenson and you pulled out. You withdrew. So there better be a good reason.
Not that I owe this guy understanding, because I don't.
Most I can do as a customer, as a consumer. If you're going to deprive me of a fight that I was waiting for, you better offer me up a decent alternative. Otherwise, you're just another PBC duck. Upstairs at super middleweight, veteran trainer Robert Garcia says, I give Charlo a big chance because Canelo hasn't looked good in his recent fights.
It's a fair assessment.
Let's not forget that, we've seen those types of videos in his previous fights, Canelo's previous fights, where he hasn't looked great in his last couple of fights, said Garcia, who was part of a panel that also included Calvin Ford, Bob Santos, and Ronnie Shields. So, it's a big difference from showing a video, a 30-second video working hard to the actual fight, His last couple of fights, that's the only thing that I have to say, that I give Charlo a big chance because Canelo hasn't looked that good in his recent fights. I know he said, there was a few injuries, a few personal problems during camp, so let's hope that is the case. Because I know I want to see a great competitive fight, and we will, The question is Canelo going to be better than he has been in his last couple of fights?
It's a legitimate question.
Because Canelo didn't look nothing spectacular in the Golovkin rubber match, and even though he dominated John Ryder, he didn't stop him.
Then again, who's stopped John Ryder in recent memory? Am I missing something?
I know that Nick Blackwell stopped him many years ago in many fights, but since then, he's been in the ring with a lot of people. He's been in the ring with the likes of Daniel Jacobs, Callum Smith,
Zach Parker.
Robert Garcia continued, Charlo's a fighter. Charlo is one of those guys that is not going to hold back. He's not going to, take too many punches. He's going to fight back. So let's see what Canelo brings, I think it's going to be a very, very, very close fight, very competitive.
I think Canelo Canelo's going into this fight with some drawbacks. Yeah, he hasn't looked great his last couple of fights. He hasn't. And, you know, the weight.
The weight of over 60 professional bouts. Remember, Canelo Alvarez is a fighter who's been boxing as a professional since age 15. He's got a lot more miles on the odometer than most of his contemporaries. And eventually, that does catch up to you. That right now might be the most opportune time to fight Canelo Alvarez. I understand that.
It might be.
The opposing argument, however, the caveat, is that Jermell Charlo hasn't boxed in over a year, whereas Canelo has. Canelo's been active, more active, the last 12 months than Jermell. This is not the kind of fight where you need to be shaking off ring rust.
Shouldn't be.
The caveat is that this is a much, much better fighter than any fighter that Jermell has fought so far. John Ryder, who I just mentioned, he recently chimed in on the upcoming fight saying,
Canelo plays with you.
in reference to Canelo Alvarez's traps that he sets in the middle of a fight. Try and understand that while Jermell Charlo is a good fighter, a solid fighter, and an undisputed champion, he's never fought somebody like this on a stage this size.
It's a big stage.
We often talk about those aforementioned factors, Jermell Charlo's inactivity, the fact he's jumping up from 154 to 168 for this fight, but also the psychological component, that he's never fought on a stage this size before. And some fighters, at least psychologically, they tend to shrink.
On a big stage.
Some fighters shrink in what are the biggest moments in their career. That could happen to Jermell Charlo. The biggest and most important factors, at least to me, is that Jermell Charlo hasn't fought in a while, so he'll be shaking off ring rust, and this is a less than ideal fight to be doing that he's going to be carrying more weight into the fight than he normally carries, and that given that his plan of action is to move lateral, use his height, use his length, and beat those feet.
He wants to do with Canelo what he did with Bryan.
But this ain't Bryan, and this ain't junior middleweight. This is super middleweight. You carrying that much weight and moving around the ring that much might wear on your energy reserve. So you get off to a decent start, but around the middle, you get tired. You start to fade. You start to get hit by a bigger puncher than any puncher you've fought so far.
Even if you think Canelo's on the slide.
So was Manny Pacquiao when he fought a then unbeaten Keith Thurman.
Levels.
That even a Manny Pacquiao on the back nine, even a Manny Pacquiao that's on the slide, is still a better, higher grade of fighter than a Keith Thurman. That might ring true when it comes to Canelo and Jermell. Maybe Canelo is on the slide. Maybe there is a bit of decline, a bit of slippage.
Levels.
Still competes at a higher level than Jermell Charlo.
Levels.
Jermell may have the right plan of action, so to speak. Maybe he's got the right idea, but there's having the idea and being able to execute it. And physically,
You haven't fought in a year. You haven't acclimated to this weight.
and he hits harder than any fighter that's ever hit you. You're not used to that.
He slips better, rolls better, counters better.
Better than any fighter that you fought. You're not used to that.
Yeah, Jermell might get off to a decent start, but I think he's going to fade down the stretch, and I think he's going to get stopped.
He's gonna get knocked out.